Namaskar, Nileshok here, and I will be presenting on when Itihasa weds Geology. And naturally, this is in the context of antiquity and morphodynamics of river Saraswati. I will go through two phases of Purva Paksha. There is one group specifically motivated by Aryan invasion theory, and they see the entire issue of Saraswati in a specific light. There is a second group, we can consider that as pro-Indic group, and they also look at Saraswati evidence different than what the AIT group would do, but not always in congruence with what the empirical scientific evidence is telling us about river Saraswati. I will briefly mention the scientific method and its comparison or its connection with the Indian Darshana system. Then explain the scientific process for the growth of knowledge. For example, the process is iterative. Everyone seems to understand that. And Sir Karl Popper popularized this network framework. He called it P1 TTEE P2. I'll briefly talk about it and then get into the actual evidence from ancient Indian narratives for the historical events, and then do their corroboration with scientific evidence of river Saraswati and try to bring them together, show how impressive the corroboration is, and also show the future possibilities for future research. I will bring out different areas, different multidisciplinary fields, and the growing evidence that can be used to corroborate the river Saraswati in terms of its descriptions from the ancient Indian narratives, and also what we can find in terms of the history or Itihasa from the same set of ancient Indian narratives, and then triangulate it with the physical, factual, empirical evidence. And finally, we'll conclude by stating the characteristics of a revolutionary theory or theories and what is to be expected and how we use a successful theory and the outcome of a successful theory, and use this framework of starting with a previously unsolved problem to a successful theory, which leads to newer problems of higher complexity, and how the cycle repeats. So quickly, Purva Paksha part 1. This is quickly summarizing how Western Indology predominantly looks at the research of Saraswati. There are a good number of people who will simply not accept that Saraswati is in India. Many of them will refer or claim that the Saraswati is actually in Iran. And if you ask them for evidence, there is none. Okay, so we have to use Nyaya Darshana principle, or we have to use Hitchens razor. Any claim that is made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Now, if they admit to the existence of river Saraswati in India, guess what? They will say what matters, the relevant portion matters is only after 2000 BC, 1500 BC. And why is that? Because of Aryan invasion that only happened after 2000 BC, according to them, and Rigveda was composed only after that, which is 1500 BCE. Now, when it comes to Mahabharata and Ramayana, they simply do not see these as Itihasa or history, and they only look at this as a kavya. They look at the physical manuscript that they may able to date or speculate the date, and therefore they place it sometime typically after 200 BCE, between 200 BCE and 400 CE is as far back as they are willing to go. Again, what is the evidence for any of these claims? The answer is none or zilch. Let's quickly look at the part 2 of Purva Paksha. What is the Indian response to this Aryan invasion theory or the claims of Saraswati by Western Indologists, such as the Saraswatis in Iran? Well, it's a very haphazard response. Some people have done job better than others. But now there is enough evidence that this group can confidently claim that Saraswati is in India, Saraswati was in India. However, when it comes to civilization speak, the Indian civilization, for a reason that I cannot comprehend, most of the Indic researchers will limit themselves with the upper limit, going backwards, I'm saying. So that's the upper limit of 10,000 years. So 8,000 BC and afterwards, that's when they see Indian civilization starting, Indian civilization taking place, and therefore they will place Rigveda sometime after 8,000 BC. They will acknowledge a continuous civilization going for 7,000 plus years based on archaeology evidence and whatnot. Interestingly, when it comes to Ramayana and Mahabharata, again, we might find multiple camps. I have heard statements such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, they are historical, but they are not history. I don't know what that means. They will also say there might be a kernel of truth in terms of history, but we should not bother dating it. I don't know what kind of logic is this. I don't know what kind of science is this, but I'm simply stating this as a factual statements that I have heard from pro-Indic researchers in the context of Ramayana and Mahabharata. And these Ramayana, Mahabharata, Rigveda are very closely tied to river Saraswati. Most of the researchers would agree that Saraswati died sometime after 3000 BC, 2000 BC. Definitely it was gone by 2000 BC. And many, for whatever reason, which again, I don't understand, they see only archaeology as the only empirical evidence. Again, I'm not going to waste my time convincing them otherwise. But even the archaeology that they refer to is a very reductionist view of archaeology. Typically goes to pots and pans and hooks and metal objects that they would find. In fact, if you look at the expanded definition of archaeology, and that's not something happened yesterday, when we look at hydrology evidence, seismology evidence, agriculture evidence, domestication of animals evidence, oceanography evidence, climatology evidence, if it is found on the earth and we can relate to the civilizational narrative, that is archaeology evidence. Anyways, quickly, the method that I employed in all my research of last 25, 30 years is the logic of scientific method, logic of scientific discovery, which is essentially a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory, in the context of a background knowledge. I thought everyone understood this. But once I published my first book, I quickly realized that many researchers actually don't understand what else is required. In fact, many don't even understand this 5-step method. But there are additional psychological aspects that need to be brought together with this empirical method, which is what? Scientific acumen, logical reasoning, and then the Tantra Yukti. Just for our presentation, if we quickly look at the central piece of the logic of scientific method, you will find not only perfect parallels in our Indian Darshana system, but frankly, Indian Darshana system goes into much depth in comparison to what is presented as a modern science from the Western point of view. Now, Sir Karl Popper explains this method that you start with a tough unsolved problem. Then to solve that problem, you work through this scientific acumen, logical reasoning, Tantra Yukti. You propose a solution that is essentially your theory. That is a tentative solution. That theory allows you to make predictions. And actually, one of the prediction is the problem to your unsolved problem. Once you make those predictions, then you start collecting the data. You might already have some data from past observations, experiments, natural observations, and then you take these observations, do the comparison with your theory. And if it doesn't match, you go back to the table and propose another theory. If it does match, then at least for now, you have successfully used that theory to solve the problem that you began with. However, even when a theory is successful, or especially if it is a successful, what happens, not usually, every single time without exception, is that it leads to newer problems of higher complexity. So that's, I'm calling it P2. And then now P2 becomes the new problem to be solved. And therefore, theories of higher complexity sometimes can be offered to solve that problem. This goes in a cyclical fashion, and it's only limited by the availability of evidence and advances in science and technology. So now, anytime we are given this choice, do you want to take the blue pill or the red pill? The blue pill is very comforting. Okay, there is mass support, because what Thomas Kuhn calls the normal science. Okay, everyone has sort of accepted it. It's easy to be comfortable there, crank papers if you are in academia, and everyone is happy. On the other hand, the red pill is very unsettling, but that is the way to get closer to the truth, to find the best approximation to the truth, and never be comfortable with the status quo. Quickly coming to the Satluj, or sorry, coming to the Saraswati River, I read Satluj there. So history of Kurukshetra, what do you find? If we go back in history, the Rigveda actually don't find the name Kurukshetra. There are not many space names in Rigveda. You come to the time of Parshurama, whenever that is, you hear the word Samanta Panchak. Again, it is mentioned in the Mahabharata. There is a very simple and easy explanation for the Samanta Panchak, but I'll wait for that. Sama Anta. Say a place where all of them, the Panchak, are ending. Okay, that is my interpretation for it. Astronomy texts also don't refer to Kurukshetra. They will refer to these places as Rohtak, as Staneshwar, and so on. By the time you come to Ramayana, you see the word Kuru jungle for this area. And then by Mahabharata, you hear the word Kurukshetra. It's a very broad area. Having said that, I'm going to highlight the area which again comes from Yajurveda, like Vajasaniya Samvita. And there the area is referred to as a Pancha Nadya. Okay. Now, quickly, if you look at the relative chronology, most of the researchers would agree with it. Okay. There was a grand Saraswati a long time ago. At some point, Yamuna separated from Saraswati. At some point, Satluj separated from Saraswati. Then there was an intensification and de-intensification of monsoon. Naturally, during all this time, there is a dance of tributaries and distributaries. Sometimes they're coming together, sometimes they're separating itself, they're changing their paths, like Shutudri, for example. Then finally, the drying of Saraswati begins, and eventually Saraswati is no longer in existence. That people will agree. However, if you get into the absolute chronology discussions, especially in the context of Itihasa, then all hell breaks loose. Quickly, just to summarize my work first, and then I'm going to bring in the Saraswati evidence. The axis of time today is 21st century. If you go back to that zero, which is going back to the beginning of Gregorian calendar to 2000 years ago. And then we have 5000 BC, 10,000 BC, 15,000 BC, and so on. European Enlightenment began sometime in 17th century, and one of the byproduct, extremely unfortunate, bad for India, was this whole nonsense of Aryan invasion theory. What evidence they have, or what evidence they have today? Zilch, nothing. But still, it is there in our textbooks and in the public discourse. In response, the Indic researchers, the group of Indic researchers, most of us, I would say, tried to respond to that, and we were partly successful. However, we got stuck, I feel, that into our own pond that cannot allow us to go beyond 8000 BC for whatever reason that is beyond my comprehension. Anyways, but what I'm going to show you with evidence is that it is actually very easy to go beyond that 8000 BC. I began my research work, original research in the area of Mahabharata, somewhat now 25 years ago, with one specific verse of the astronomy verse of Mahabharata. Long story short, I extracted close to 300 plus astronomy references from the Mahabharata. Then I put them together in an empirical fashion via scientific method, objective testing, like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, a crossword puzzle, and it leads to only one specific year, 5561 BCE, for the year of Mahabharata war. I did the same thing for the references from Valmiki Ramayana, extracted 300 plus astronomy references from Valmiki Ramayana. Again, same process leads to one specific year, 12,209 BCE. And then looking at the hydrology evidence from Rigveda, using the relative chronology presented by Sri Srikant Talagiri, and then I could propose the timing of Rigveda. Again, this is approximate, but definitely the last portions like Mandala 10 are contemporaneous with the Mahabharata dating, Mahabharata timing, 6th millennium BC. However, if you look at the oldest portions of Rigveda, such as the Mandala 63742, where you see Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati, or Giribhya, Samudra, and a grand Saraswati, you will find, based on the empirical data, we can definitely put certain portions of the oldest mandalas of Rigveda beyond 22,000 BC. So essentially, we have a solid evidence for Indian civilization that goes beyond 24,000 years. And what I did using astronomy and hydrology evidence is now corroborated by hundreds and thousands of empirical data points from multiple different disciplines of hard sciences. Okay, these are my books which cover the dating of Mahabharata and dating of Ramayana. They don't cover in much detail the dating of Rigveda, but those books are actually coming very soon. Now, what I want to show you against this historical framework, the evidence of river Saraswati, to show how beautifully it matches. Most of us are in agreement that Saraswati went extinct around 3000 BC, 2000 BC. Okay, that's that time period. That is after the Mahabharata war. During the Mahabharata war, Saraswati is flowing beautifully with copious quantity of water in many places. Now, it is also true that it has disappeared under the sand in some places. It is coming out of the sand, emerging out of the sand in other places. And also Vinashan existed, which is to say it wasn't going all the way to the ocean during the 6th millennium BCE. Now, what is it that was bringing the water? I'm taking the story backwards. If I would have started from other side, you would have seen that Yamuna has already separated from Saraswati a long time back. Same thing with Satluj. So now the question is, what is it that bringing the water to Saraswati? Obviously, there are few tributaries and maybe the branches of Satluj and Yamuna, but there was an intensification of monsoon between 7000 BC and until 4500 BC, right where the Mahabharata falls. So that explains the copious quantity of water in certain portions of Saraswati. Then if we look at the research work of Konde, multiple papers, or Mericorti or Frankfurt, what it tells us is that the grand Saraswati existed. However, like Konde's work is geochemistry, geophysics, and such. But there was no grand river starting with the mountains and going all the way to the ocean in the last 10,000 years in the area of Saraswati. That is the finding of these individuals. And that actually consistently matches with what we find as a descriptions in Mahabharata, but also as a descriptions in Ramayana. For example, Ramayana has a Saraswati, but it's no longer the grand river. And interestingly, Ramayana describes river Shatudri as the one that has turned westward and again flowing with a good quantity of water. Now, why is this important? Because a paper of Singh and others from 2017, IIT Kanpur showed that actually Satluj turned westward and split from Saraswati, or coming down to Saraswati, in 13,000 BC, about 1,000 years before the Ramayana. And then that same paper showed the evidence for a grand Saraswati going beyond that 22,000 BCE. And lastly, the separation of Yamuna from Saraswati occurred sometime between 50,000 and 40,000 BCE, based on wonderful research work of Peter Klift and Dave and so on. Now, is this the end of it? There is a wonderful corroboration. In a way, I solved the problem of matching the Saraswati data with the historical data from ancient Indian narratives using empirical data. But is that the end of it? Well, actually not, because if you start studying deeply Ramayana, Mahabharata, because it has older references, Puranas, and also Rigveda and other Vedas. What you find is that actually the civilizational existence can go much farther in antiquity. We just don't know how far. But myself and some of my co-researchers, we have spent last 4 5 years exhaustively looking at these references, and based on that we have made predictions. Now what I'm going to show you, these are not all predictions that are validated by the research as of now, but we are looking at the evidence from different fields of hard sciences such as climatology, and you can see some of the graphs that you can see on the screen. This is a work of Mrs. Rupa Bhattiji, my co-researcher. We are looking at the evidence from climatology, from astronomy, from agriculture, from oceanography, from astronomy, again, pole stars, domestication of animals, even a language formation, like literally pushing the limits. Because if you look at Rigveda and some of the roots, you can see almost like some portions of Rigveda are written when even the language was being formed. And all we have is an estimate in terms of like genes such as FOXP2, which is considered responsible for the linguistic ability that human beings have, and it appears that other animals don't have. So we are possibly going back to those estimated time period of 200,000, possibly 300,000. Using some other astronomy references, we are proposing possibly predictions going to back to 200,000, 220,000. Number of these predictions are coming out to be true, and we are slowly publishing our work. But it remains a long journey, but it's a very exciting journey. With that, I would like to stop. And if there is additional time, I would be very happy to take any questions and respond to any objections. Thank you.